Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And, of course, if you are new to the show, lots of ways to listen. Of course, everything is archived over at AFR. You can also sign up through my RSS feed, through emails. You can find me on YouTube. Of course, I'm on TuneIn, iTunes, Stitcher. On Friday nights from 10 to 12, you can hear me on Awake, PSN, People's Internet Radio, and Ed Opperman's Spreaker channel. And from 6 to 8 on Saturdays on KYAH 540 AM out in Utah. If you're in the Utah area, you can always tune in and listen to my show there. So, you know, again, lots of ways to listen to the show, and I'm adding some more as we speak. Quickly, I want to thank Dominic for recently signing up to Patreon. So if you want to support my work and all the stuff I do, you can go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. And of course, that $1 a month gets you access to the exclusive bonus podcast. And recently I had on Kevin Gasola from shadowproof.com talking about the Reality Winner case. And Kevin was actually down in Augusta at the most recent hearing, which was a motion to suppress statements that Reality Winner made to the FBI when she was basically being interrogated, although they call it interviewing. So definitely check that out if you have not already listened to it. Today, today we are joined in the first hour by our good friend JP Sottile of newsvandal.com. Of course, the man behind the News Vandal News Rundown, or the News Vandal Rundown, which is an excellent email, I don't even know, I guess like aggregation of the news. I know that sounds silly, JP, but that is what it is. It is my go-to in the mornings if you want to get the literal rundown on what's going on both here at home and abroad. And JP, you always throw in some interesting little tidbits and strange news stories at the end as well, the odds and ends section. But JP Sottile, how are you?
I'm great. And Pierce, you're all over the place. I mean, you're becoming a phenomenon. I have to tell you, the reason I love coming on the show is because of the theme song.
Oh, great.
I mean, it literally makes me feel like I'm starring in a television spin-off of the movie Flashdance, and I just it's like my inner '80s kid just comes out. It's a wonderful way to get going. Look, what a strange day we had yesterday. We can talk about Sam Nunberg. There are actually some interesting journalistic questions about that. We could talk. There's so many directions to go. We got tariffs. We've got North Korea. I mean, it is a smorgasbord, which is one of the reasons why I continue to pound away at the rundown. And for those who don't get the rundown, what I do is I collect about 20 pages of stories, links. It's basically a headline and a hyperlink, 20 pages, and then I boil that down to 4 pages before I hit send. And I try and put opposing views on. So if you're going to see something from National Review next to Mother Jones, which might be next to American Spectator. You're going to see sources you may not go to, like American Thinker. I've used AmmoLand when the gun control thing came on. If you want to see a fascinating website, go to AmmoLand. And the way I put the headlines together, I do it in such a way that I create what I call a meta story. So if you were only to read the headlines in order, they will flow so that the headlines themselves create a story about what the news cycle has been up to for the last 24 hours. So it's like a cheat sheet. And if you just spent about 8 minutes going from the top of the rundown to the bottom and didn't click on a single hyperlink and just read the headlines, you would probably know more than Wolf Blitzer, which may not be saying much.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not a difficult thing to do. Wolf Blitzer, I refuse to watch CNN anymore. I just can't bear with it. But Wolf Blitzer is still there.
Yeah, and it's now it's just Wolf, and in the lower. So if you've ever worked in television, I was in television news for a while, and there's a lower third. That's the graphic that you see at the bottom. And I noticed today as I was flicking around, because I in between writing and putting the rundown, because I'm always in collection mode and doing things like doing your great show, I'm always flicking around to see how things are being covered in different places. And I'm with you. CNN is, for me, the least informative and the hardest to watch of all the shows. Occasionally, if I've had a couple drinks, I don't mind watching Don Lemon, just because he's kind of funny. It's sort of like taking a Quaalude at the end of the day. But now on the lower third, you just have Wolf's name and just the very lower right-hand corner. And I noticed this, every 4 seconds, a little shimmering effect goes across his name. So it's like, Wolf, 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 as if he's gleaming as you're watching him. It's really quite disgusting. But during the day, I tend to go between Fox and MSNBC because actually Fox during the day is far more tolerable because Shepard Smith is actually quite entertaining as well.
Yeah. I was going to say, actually, the only person on CNN I actually enjoy, and it's really only during an election night, is John King, when they get him in front of that big smart board. And I remember, the last election, we made it a point, all my friends would come over to my apartment, and we'd make dinner for Super Tuesday and all the big various caucuses and stuff like that, and they were all, they most of them don't really follow the news as closely as you or I do, and they all fell in love with John King and his ability to continually talk even when there's nothing really to report on, and he's just clicking away and showing you this county and this district, and I do kind of love John King's ability to constantly talk and click on that board. And I will say, I despise Jake Tapper. I just find him so annoying. But his recent conversation with Steve Israel, is that his name? The police chief down in Broward County.
Oh yes, yes.
When he said I'm anyone that hasn't figured it out, I'm a big follower of the O.J. Simpson trial. So of course, I had to watch the clip where Steve Israel says, if and buts were candy and nuts, O.J. would still be in the record book, which is such a bizarre. I don't even know what. First off, O.J. is in the record book. I don't. It's not as if the trial somehow they there's no asterisk next to his name. Saying he was accused of killing 2 people. He still is in the record book, but and was retired for many years even when that happened. So I don't know quite what the hell he's talking about. But I love Jake Tapper's response of, I don't know what that means, sir. There's 17 people that are dead. Which is just so to the point, and I guess hats off to Jake Tapper in that moment. I don't know what the hell I would have said. But
that's quick, and I'll give you one thing on King, because I do love King as well. One, because I'm a nerd on these things, and this is just on politics in general, which is one of the things I'm fascinated about this upcoming election, the election season starting today with the primaries in Texas. I love getting into the minutia of how counties vote and the county level, but here's the phrase you hear over and over again with King, and you'll know this: basket of votes.
Yes.
There is a basket of votes still waiting to be counted. Another basket of votes here. Yeah. And it makes it sound like something that you can you want to go pick up and take home and eat. Where you going? I'm going to get me a basket of votes. Whoa, get some sauce on that. No, here's the other thing about King. is that he's not really editorializing. He's one of the last holdouts who is simply reporting on data.
Yes.
And that's another appealing part of that. As a matter of fact, today when I was over watching Wolf and seeing his gleaming little name in the lower right-hand corner, he was interviewing a reporter in Britain reporting on the poisoning of a former Russian colonel. They call him a spy, a double agent. He's called a double agent by the Kremlin. He and his daughter were poisoned, it looks like on a park bench yesterday. And this is turning into an international affair, and Boris Johnson, the foreign minister, saying that foreign secretary is actually the proper term, saying that if this turns out to be a poisoning, he's going to do whatever he can to bring Russia to heel, which is an interesting thing for Boris Johnson to say, particularly since Boris Johnson was actually sort of had some leanings towards Russia for a while. Anyway, so and it turned into an incident because he made some statement about, we'll boycott the World Cup, which you can't do in Britain. You cannot say we're not going to the World Cup. So he had to backtrack on that. So Wolf is interviewing this guy, this reporter, and the reporter logs his report, and it's a straight up, here's the reporting, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, this is what we expect to find out in the next 24 hours. And Wolf Blitzer says, well, thank you for that disturbing report. And I'm thinking, did you have to say disturbing? In a way, that's kind of the problem with everything, even when you have news readers, because that's really what these guys are. When was last time Wolf reported on anything? When was the last time he was actually doing shoe leather reporting? But on Russia, here's something I hate. Our democracy was attacked. If you are using first-person pronouns or possessive pronouns, you're not engaged in journalism. You say Russia is accused of attacking the election systems of the United States. You could say that, but when you say our or this is a 9/11 thing, we were attacked on 9/11. Really? We? Or why are we bombing? This is a question. Why are we bombing? Wait, are you bombing? So, there's a line that used to be present in journalism, and if you go to BBC or Deutsche Welle or even France 24, some of the overseas news channels, you will find that bright line still exists. It is gone in American television journalism.
Oh, it kind of reminds me when you get like hardcore sports fans saying like, yeah, we won, or it's like, you didn't do anything. You sat and watched it on TV. You didn't even go to the game.
That's right. And I'm a hardcore, particularly baseball fan and a basketball fan for years. I have never been able to say we. I just can't do it.
No, it's horrible. No, exactly. Yeah, you didn't do anything.
Now, I get why people do it, and I think in sports there's something quaint about it. I did get a kick out of watching the people of Philadelphia finally celebrate a win for the Eagles and all that. That was great. Go into Periscope and watch people go nuts. And there's that we feeling and that sort of tribalism that's there. I mean, this is really, I think on some level, we as a species right now we're struggling with the power of tribalism in our everyday lives. And we are experiencing sort of a high point, a tribal moment here in the United States and around the world. And I think it's one of the reasons why we have so many of the fissures opening up that we're seeing, and so much of the violence that we're seeing is related to this growing sense of tribalism in a world in which we seem to have lost other senses of association. So I get all that, but in journalism in particular, when you hear we, our, I, us, or thank you. You brought up Steve Israel. How many times were people thanked, first responders? Oh, thank you for doing what you did. Thank you for standing up for these kids. No, it's not your job to thank anybody. And I think that this is part of what has led to the confusing moment we find ourselves in with fake news. And it's one of the reasons why a piddly little operation with 13 people that was sent over by the Internet Research Agency from Putin Chef from St. Petersburg could have some effect is because all of the lines had been eliminated before these people ever showed up.
So many things I want to get into today with you, JP. And I almost like don't want to get into the Mueller Russia stuff, although because I mean we've talked about it so many times.
Yeah. No, you're
and you know, I mean, for better or worse, I mean, it's not going away. And clearly, you know, in spite of protests from the pro-Trump camp, I mean, it's not ending anytime soon. And while I don't see any of the recent machinations of Mueller and his investigation as being, you know, some sort of smoking gun or anything like that, or a slam dunk, it is still there all the same. And, you know, this is just sort of like, I mean, I assume we will look back on, you know, in the history books when talking about certainly Trump's first few years, if not his whole first 4 years in office, will be plagued by the Mueller investigation. There's no way around it.
Well, you know, I can sum this up pretty quickly. We will know.
Yeah.
Mueller will issue a report. He will issue a report, and we will actually find out. This is one of the great frustrations I have about this, because I think there is some kind of there, and it's pretty obvious now with what we know about Kushner and the UAE and Kushner and Qatar, and now it's Kushner and Turkey and Kushner and China and 666 Fifth Avenue. It looks like there's probably some kind of money issue there or something. It looks like. But you want to know what? We're going to know. We're going to know. And one of the things I have found ironic is the Adam Schiffs of the world. And I understand from their point of view, they're battling it out to try and wrest some kind of control or have some kind of say in the House Intelligence Investigation Committee investigation. But the House Intelligence Committee investigation is actually irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the whole process because Mueller has the subpoena power that Adam Schiff has never had. So Adam Schiff just looks like he's out there grandstanding, and on some level he's actually undermining the potential acceptance of the conclusions that Mueller will reach when he issues his report. Because he's clouding it by turning it into a far more partisan issue than it actually has to be by grandstanding on it. I think that's if I was on Mueller's team, I would be frustrated by that. I would be frustrated by Rachel Maddow spending every single night for 1 hour going over all the different minutia of whatever little thing she can glean from some source that said something yesterday. The report's going to be released. And for anybody who's old enough, I tell you got to be careful because Lawrence Walsh pretty much had the Iran-Contra people nailed. He had them nailed on everything but the drug dealing. And the Kerry Commission actually picked up with the drug dealing and was starting to get close to nailing people on drug dealing. And look what happened with that. That thing went on for years. It ended up with some pardons. There was a firewall built around Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan was basically was saved from really being too intensely tarnished by it. His legacy certainly hasn't suffered from it. And, you know, these investigations are tough things to try and turn into something more, as the Republicans found and as Ken Starr found when Whitewater turned into Monica Lewinsky.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned briefly back there Jared Kushner, who, you know, I think like Wolf Blitzer, I also despise. And, you know, and he just always has this, like, whenever you see these, like, sort of candid shots of him, I mean, he always looks like, you know, he knows he's in trouble. You know, he has this sort of, like, terrified look when he looks at a camera. And, you know, he's now lost his top secret security clearance, which is probably a good thing, although he's apparently still going to be helping to find a lasting peace in the Middle East. I'm not sure quite how he's going to do that without a top-level security clearance, but, you know, I'm sure Jared will find a way. But along with that, you know, it's also become more apparent that his ties with Qatar and the United Arab Emirates are much stronger, or much, you know, they're much more tangible than we may have been led to believe. And I want you to just kind of talk quickly on that, JP, because the you know, the issue of Qatar and Jared Kushner, you know, there's some interesting timing with the sanctions against
That's
Qatar, our longtime ally, and Qatar, of course, houses our largest military base in the Middle East. And the timing of these sanctions and all of the U.S. politicians complaining about Qatar, like they just sort of realized for the first time that maybe they're not on the up and up. That seems very interesting in light of Jared Kushner's ties there. So tell the listeners a little bit about that, JP, because I think this is, again, one of these stories that it kind of gets swept under because, it's just about Russia and who cares about Kushner, and it's a lot of, it's almost like just sort of Washington gossip. But there is a story there.
Well, and I think it's a good way to understand the entire narrative, because I think we might come to a point at which, although Trump has around him the gang that can't spook straight, that's what I call them. And this is much different than the gang around Ronald Reagan, which were all of the old CIA covert operators and loyalists that helped get Bush onto the ticket with him as a vice president. And then when you get into the Reagan administration, between Casey and at CIA and Bush in the vice president slot, you have people who know how to run covert operations and create plausible deniability and to put firewalls around people. I don't think Kushner and Don Jr. and these guys know how to firewall anybody, let alone Donald Trump. And I think there is a possibility that at the end of this, we will find that Donald Trump is actually the least implicated of the people involved in this thing, whereas Jared Kushner might be the most implicated, because Jared Kushner, when you go for your security clearance, you have to fill out this very complicated sort of financial declaration form. And it's not so complicated that you can't fill it out correctly, but often you have to make amendments. Well, I think he's made over 100 amendments to this thing. And this is one of the smoking guns, or one of the trails that Mueller has followed, because Kushner has this billion-dollar boondoggle called 666 Fifth Avenue, this building that he bought, heavily leveraged. He has a massive balloon payment coming, and Bloomberg has been on this for a long time. They were on this when Jared Kushner was seen as the mastermind arranging the big visit that Trump made, the sword dancing visit to Saudi Arabia. That was made in concert with a guy named Steven Schwartzman, and Steven Schwartzman is the head of Blackstone, and Blackstone is a major private equity firm. And part of what was going on there is that he's already in hock to Schwartzman. And by the way, Schwartzman was at Mar-a-Lago last weekend, dining with Donald Trump himself. And what they were working on with Mohammed bin Salman, the MBS as he's often called, the young guy who has just arranged a purge in Saudi Arabia of many of the royals around him, which was really just a sort of a shakedown where he accumulated many billions of dollars because Saudi Arabia last year was having a hard time paying their civil servants. Yes, Saudi Arabia having a hard time paying civil servants. They have been suffering financially. So Kushner arranges for this thing to go over there, and there's the weapon sales and blah, blah, blah. But part of that was Schwartzman and Kushner and Mohammed bin Salman coming up with a scheme whereby the Saudis and Blackstone would come together to fund what? Privately held infrastructure in the United States. Well, that's kind of interesting. Now we've learned that we've known that Kushner's sister, right, went to China after the election and said, hey, there are these golden ticket visas out there. If you invest X number of dollars, it's like over $1 million, you can get a fast track visa to come to the United States. And if you invest in our project at Kushner Companies, you can get one of these. I can get you one of these golden ticket visas. Oops, there's another red flag. Then we have the Qatari thing, where the Kushner Companies go to the Qataris looking for money for 666 Fifth Avenue, among other things. The Qataris back out, and then a couple weeks later, all of a sudden, there is this blockade, the sanctions and blockade of Qatar are arranged through the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. They're the bulwarks. Under the auspices of the Qataris are the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the Arab world. Really? That's coming out of Saudi Arabia? I mean, I remember weren't there like 19 Qataris among the hijackers? No. So now you have the United Arab Emirates also getting involved. The United Arab Emirates, apparently there are these emails, not apparently, we know, but apparently they did not like Rex Tillerson because Rex Tillerson did not like the Qatari blockade, and the United Arab Emirates, which was also getting involved in these talks to do financing for the Kushner companies, they're sending emails saying, we want you to get rid of Tillerson. Well, the funny thing about that is that Jane Mayer just had a piece about Christopher Steele, and Christopher Steele has apparently had a memo we haven't seen yet that is obviously being held by the FBI and most likely the Mueller investigation, that said that when Romney was proposed as Secretary of State, there was a message sent from the Kremlin through to the Trump transition that they didn't want somebody like Romney because Romney is a hardliner on sanctions against Russia. Remember, Obama criticized Romney for 20th century thinking in the 21st century when Romney said that Russia is our number one threat, back when Russia wasn't the number one threat according to Barack Obama, that when he was up for re-election. And so all of a sudden Romney was dumped in favor of Tillerson, who was at Exxon, and as T. Rexon, as one of my friends calls him, and had billions of dollars worth of deals waiting once the sanctions were lifted to explore oil and gas inside Russia. So I think we have quite a tangled web there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So look, the bottom line is that it looks like Kushner was trading on his position to extort or create, not extort, that's a strong word, here's where extort, I'll get to extort, to come up with financial dealings with foreign entities, which makes him liable to what? Extortion, which is one of the reasons, financial extortion or blackmail is one of the reasons why you don't get a security clearance from the FBI. So this is probably one of the reasons why he continued to not have a security clearance and continue to serve, because he had all of these red flags in his financial statement, as much as that financial statement was actually filled out because he had to go back 100 times and continue to make amendments. But obviously the FBI was on top of all this and seeing that he had all of these compromised positions that go back to the fact that he kind of isn't that great at doing big real estate deals, which is what 666 Fifth Avenue is a symbol of.
Yeah, absolutely. And what, I guess, JP, with all of this sort of going on in the background, I mean, what do you have any sense of like what the next sort of like step is with all of this? I mean, is Kushner? I know that a lot of people sort of throw out these that they're going to get rid of Kushner. He's in a jail time. They're going to subpoena him. Blah blah blah. I mean, is there anything that might conceivably happen to him? I mean, losing the security clearance seemed possibly like a first step towards nudging him out the back door. But do you see anything like that happening?
No, well, that's John Kelly, who apparently the fissure is in the White House is between the Kelly group on one side and Jarvanka, as they're called, Ivanka and Jared on the other side. And Kelly is apparently the guy who wants to push Kushner out. And where Trump actually is on this, we don't know, but I think we got a signal yesterday because Geraldo Rivera did this puff piece on Jared and Ivanka for Sean Hannity's show. And I think if you want to know anything about what's going on in Trump's mind, you go with whatever is on Hannity and Fox and Friends. And the fact that Geraldo did this puff piece about how they're these incredibly bright kids and they're wonderful public servants and they're doing a great job and they're in a nest of vipers. That's what he called it, a nest of vipers in the White House. Well, if there's a nest of vipers in the White House, that must be John Kelly, right? So and Gary Cohn perhaps, although Gary Cohn was seen as being part of the Kushner group because Gary Cohn was part of sort of the Democratic Wall Street group that Kushner was aligned with, that Steve Bannon was against. I mean, you hear where I'm going with this? I mean, it's so convoluted, and it is such a soap opera. It is, as the White House turns, it's almost as my stomach turns having to continue to go over this. Where it all ends, I come back to where we started with this discussion, which is Mueller's going to issue a report, and then we're going to know. And I think Trump would be loath to actually jettison Jared and Ivanka, because as somebody who never actually as a businessman had to report to a board of directors ever, I think one of the reasons why we see the capriciousness and and sort of the navel-gazing narcissism that guides him is because he never had to be held accountable to anybody. He was the top of the pyramid. He was the pharaoh. And to have all of these people gone, to have Hope Hicks gone and his former bodyguard Schiller gone, to be left with Stephen Miller as sort of like one of the guys you can depend upon, if Jared and Ivanka are gone, I don't think that he would be comfortable doing that based on what I've seen in terms of his leadership style. But I think in terms of exposure, legal exposure, definitely Jared looks like the guy who has the most legal exposure, and whether he would be willing to do any kind of flipping to save his skin, I don't know, because there's one other aspect of Jared Kushner that is rarely brought up, is that Forbes did this cover story piece on him it was either right before or after the election, in which they talked about him as the guy who was the micro-targeting, numbers crunching guru of the election strategy, an election strategy that goes through Brad Parscale to Cambridge Analytica, and Cambridge Analytica is the source of the micro-targeting information that was used to create the social media campaigns that are now often being conflated with the social media campaigns that the Russians engaged in.
Mm. Yeah, and I tend to believe some of the Cambridge Analytica stuff is a little overblown. And of course, if you listen to them, they're going to make it sound like they were the most important factor. And of course, too, I mean, just one small point. I mean, they were working on Ted Cruz's campaign well before they got involved in Donald Trump's. So why isn't Ted Cruz the president of the United States?
Well, right. But there is the only other interesting aspect of that. These are just names. Is that one of the guys who's on the payroll at Cambridge Analytica was Michael Flynn,
right?
And another guy who was on the payroll over there was Steve Bannon, and the people who were paying people over there were the Mercers. So, because that's Mercer money behind Cambridge Analytica. So it's just a sort of an interesting aside, but it's also one of these places where you may have overlap, because the stuff that we're hearing now about the investigation, ever since the 13 Russians thing came out, which itself, I mean, we could talk about what the actual impact of that was, which seems more like a giant trolling campaign. I mean, that's kind of how I look at all of this, is that really this was just one big troll campaign on the part of what the Russians were doing. I have to be honest with you. I kind of think that we are not understanding this properly. We don't have a great narrative frame around this, because as Americans, we tend to think that if something happens, it happens in a vacuum, that there's nothing happened before it. Why do they hate us? Why did they attack us on 9/11? How did this happen out of the blue? I can't believe it. Well, there is a long history of this going on, and right now, if you go to TASS, which I go to the Russian official news organization every day, they're having a ball talking about all of America's election meddling over the course of the last 60 years. And this is kind of par for the course. This is what major powers do. This is what China did during the Clinton years. If you don't remember this thing, look up Al Gore and the Buddhist temple, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is de rigueur. This is how it's done, and to turn it into something much bigger than it is on this one specific point, I think misses the grander point that I think that Putin did not attack American democracy. He counterattacked. And I think if you understand it as a counterattack, and you look at the color revolutions in the former Soviet Union, and particularly in Georgia and Ukraine, you go back to the 90s when under Bill Clinton, the Harvard boys under Jeffrey Sachs, an economist, were sent over to Russia. They engage in something called shock therapy, very similar to people who are fans of Naomi Klein. It's very similar to the shock doctrine. And that shock therapy, which was the radical privatization of assets, created the oligarchs that you now hear about all of the time in the news. They were created really under the guidance of American economic influence. And the guy who lorded over all of that was a guy named Boris Yeltsin, who was a drunken buffoon, particularly in the minds of many former KGB and former Soviet officials who were trying to find a way to preserve Russia's standing on the world stage. Chief among those was a guy named Vladimir Putin. And, there has been a long history of humiliation from the beginning of the end of the Cold War through to today. And if you understand that, and you also look at the map after 9/11 and see how the United States slowly encircled Russia militarily by expanding NATO into places like Poland and the Baltic states, but also to its south in places like Afghanistan, maybe you get a better sense or context of what's actually happening here.
Well, and it's funny, and you just mentioned drunken buffoon Boris Yeltsin, who of course had an American team that helped reelect him.
Yep.
In probably one of the most blatant examples of voter fraud in the 1996 election in Russia.
Yeah, and that was the one where he was famously on stage after drinking like 7 pints of vodka and dancing like a dancing bear, like a Russian dancing bear. And there was a really good piece by Michael Crowley in Politico, I would say about 5 or 6 months ago, and in it he really talks. I remember all of these things. I remember the press conference where Bill Clinton was in tears, doubled over laughing as a drunken, again, Boris Yeltsin was telling these jokes after a high-level meeting. And all of these were basically images that were emblazoned in the minds of many leading Russian figures. And chief among those was Vladimir Putin, who saw this as a systematic and intentional humiliation of the Russian people on the part of the United States, and the guy who was orchestrating it was Bill Clinton.
Right. Yeah. And exactly. And this, again, hurling these Russian, interference. I mean, it sort of reminded me of Roger Stone complaining about voter fraud when the guy is, he's one of the biggest proponents of this. I mean, forgetting even just the 2000 election and his involvement in massive voter fraud and stealing an election down there. There's the, he took some crazy amount, like, $200,000 in cash from, his mentor Roy Cohn, in order to sway the election, presidential election here in New York. I forget who it was. A third party candidate who was running on the Republican ticket, but there was a big fear that if he won in New York, which it seemed likely, that would screw everything up for Ronald Reagan. So Roger Stone bribed New York officials in order to sway that election. I mean, and that's just
you're talking about Anderson.
Anderson, yes, John Anderson, right?
Yep, the good old John Anderson.
Yes, exactly. That Roger Stone stole that election from John Anderson,
and who was Roger
bragged
Stone,
about it.
And who was Roger Stone in business with? Paul Manafort.
Yeah.
We have this weird thing, and I get it, Pierce, is that there are a lot of people I put them in the sort of the Glenn Greenwald camp. There are a lot of people, particularly on the progressive left, who talk about how histrionic this whole Russia thing is. And as I said earlier, I look at Adam Schiff and I look at Rachel Maddow, and they are histrionic about it. And I mean, I wrote a piece a while ago, about 6 weeks ago, that, if the mainstream media is out to get Donald Trump, they suck at it. Because if you were really out to get him, let's start getting into the Department of the Interior. Let's start getting into EPA. Let's start getting into HUD. Let's start getting into the systematic corruption and cronyism and grift. This is just one big grift. This is a gigantic scam that they are running. It's a smash and grab presidency, and people are making a lot of money off of this while we're off looking at this shiny object over here of Russia all the time. In a sense, it's not that it's not newsworthy. If a story breaks or something breaks about, somebody says this, like Nunberg. I mean, you kind of had to go with Nunberg yesterday. You kind of had to. At the end, it became there was kind of a sad clown aspect of it. But, if there's a story that breaks, you cover it, and then you move on. And in the meantime, why don't we start talking about all these other things that are going on? Because Mueller is doing what Mueller's going to do, and the report's going to be issued. At the same time, to just dismiss it all as part of some neocon plot to gin up a war, I mean, I get it. And there's no doubt that the primary beneficiaries, the leading beneficiaries, let's put it that way, not the primary, the foremost beneficiaries of Trump's presidency have been the neocons. I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely.
I tweeted this out a couple of days ago. If I didn't know better, I would think that Trump's election was a neocon plot to burnish the credentials of Bill Kristol because he has been completely rehabilitated by differentiating himself against Donald Trump. These guys, Max Boot. I mean, Max Boot, I call him Max Reboot. It's, he's completely turned into a totally different person. He's no longer, at least publicly, he's no longer Max, don't call me Jack Boot. And it cracks me up, right? And I get that. I understand all that. But there is obviously something here. And I think really what it looks like to me is that the one thing I took away from Michael Wolff's book, which was really shoddy. I mean, I just can't believe that Holt put that out. I know that they were trying to milk it before the legal challenges came, and they rushed it to print, and they did make probably it's up to probably like $10 million in sales off of that thing. That was kind of a grift of its own, as Michael Wolff has slowly melted away like the slime he is. But I mean, he's looked really bad lately. But there is one thing I took away from it, which I think was really was a truism that you can apply, is that I think on some level Donald Trump is somebody who was seen as an opportunity by all of the people around them to aggrandize themselves. I think Jared Kushner saw Donald Trump as an opportunity. I actually think that Donald Trump would have been happy to have lost, become a television star on Sinclair Network as the new sort of television version of Rush Limbaugh. And to sort of play out his days as America's leading celebrity troll. I think that he would be very happy doing that. I think Kushner and Manafort and Stone and Bannon and all of the sort of detritus that accumulated around him all came with their own agendas and saw in him Mitch McConnell. There's another one. These are all people who saw in Trump an opportunity to aggrandize themselves by using him as the shiny object behind which they could play their own magic tricks. And I would even put Russia in that. I think when I look at what I've seen, like the Trump Tower meeting, that to me almost looks like an operation whereby they're actually dipping the Trump campaign as being possibly influenced by Russia, intentionally leaving breadcrumbs, intentionally doing it to compromise them and make them look like untrustworthy schlemiels. Mm. See,
and it also just makes Putin and Russia seem even more omnipotent than they appear to be.
Exactly.
Especially, and then when you see these like hacks like Luke Harding, the Guardian, he's talking about that, Trump became some sort of a double agent for Russia back in the 90s,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so far-fetched and so insane. But yeah, I mean, that's what's so funny is everybody that claims to hate him or love him even. But they're all making money hand over fist just by the mere fact that he won. You've all these, Michael Wolff. I mean, who really cared about Michael Wolff? I mean, who was reading anything he wrote? Now suddenly he's, fairly wealthy, based on that. I mean, all of these people, on both sides of it are loving this because he is just a gift that keeps on giving. Yeah. To kind of round out this conversation on some real news, not just the shiny object of Russia. You mentioned at the top of the hour, JP. I mean, there's this whole issue of tariffs, and here is something that is actual policy, I guess, coming from the Great One, and this is something that he sort of hinted at before, and this is something that whether you love him. You think that he's, the second coming of Jesus. This is something that's really going to start affecting average people. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how he actually deals with this. So explain what Trump's proposed tariffs are going to be and how they're going to affect people.
Across the board, 25% tariff on steel imports, 10% on aluminum. For years, cheap aluminum and steel has been coming in from overseas. China has often been targeted as the number one manipulator doing dumping. And what dumping is it's very similar to how Walmart took over many communities in America, while all of the local hardware stores and grocery stores all went out of business. Because if you can come in and basically you don't care about making a huge profit margin, you can basically dump cheap products into an environment, you can destroy your competition, and then you own the market. And this is one of the claims, and this has really been a Democratic proposal for a long time, to put targeted tariffs on countries that are accused of dumping steel into the United States. This is what's often considered the downside of free trade. That's why we need fair trade. Free trade is not fair trade because countries like China can produce steel at a much cheaper cost, and then they dump it here and they put the United States steel industry out of business. And the United States steel industry is pretty much a shadow of what it used to be. But also the industrial economy of the United States is a shadow of what it used to be. And although steel companies will benefit and the 300,000 steel workers would benefit because there'd be a mini revival of steel in the United States, the thing is that this is a trade war that had to be fought if it was going to be fought in the 90s. That's when the trade war actually happened. And under Bill Clinton's guidance, China went from, yearly reapproval of most favored nation trading status to eventually getting permanent MFN and introduction and acceptance into the WTO under the guidance of the United States. That's Bill Clinton. And I brought up Walmart earlier. That's in no small part because Walmart's from Arkansas, and the 90s was the decade when Walmart went from a kind of a regional powerhouse to one of maybe the most dominant retail force in the world until the coming of Amazon. And that was built in part by Walmart's need to get out of the sweatshops and child labor of Central America, where there were some scandals in the 90s and they were looking for new labor. And thanks to their buddies, the Clintons, who also came from Arkansas, they shifted production to China, and that really accelerated the end of what seemed like a trade war at that time. The trade war is over, and now what we have are international supply chains whereby partially finished products that end up getting assembled in factories in the United States are dependent upon imported steel. So imported steel not only will affect things like the price of beer, because you just need raw, or aluminum, for example, in beer, you need aluminum to come in to make cans, and then Budweiser puts the beer in the aluminum cans, and boom, and it could be 4 cents a can or something, or 6 cents a 6-pack, or that's up for debate. Wilbur Ross is making his case. You're going to have that end product increase in price on things that you as a consumer buy. So it's essentially a 10% tariff now on aluminum is a 10% tax on you as a consumer. And unless you own an aluminum plant or you're an aluminum worker, you're probably not going to benefit. If you buy cars, you're going to see more. Basically, anything that has aluminum and steel in it is likely to go up in cost. Pots and pans, everything. But I think the bigger question, there are two other things. One is in terms of steel, China is only the 10th largest exporter of steel to the United States. Ahead of China is Canada, and then South Korea and Mexico and Brazil and Germany and Japan and Russia and Taiwan and Turkey, and then China. Although China is the number one target, and Peter Navarro, who is the trade guru in Trump's White House behind this, who has spent his whole academic career attacking China as the number one enemy of the United States in the 21st century, China is not the number one source of this steel, but China does actually produce some of these component parts that rely on steel made in China that end up coming here and getting assembled into other finished goods. So there's the direct import, there's the component part import, component part importing that is part of an international web of that we call the supply chain, the international supply chain, that is also possibly going to affect jobs in the United States, where people work in finished product manufacturing and rely on these component parts that come in. So I think there's another layer here, which is back to the elections, is that there's a Pennsylvania special election coming up for the 18th congressional district, which happens to be a district that is right around Pittsburgh. And there's a Democrat there named Connor Lamb who is running neck and neck with the Republican, and I kind of feel like Donald Trump does not want to have another loss and another special election in a district that should be Republican. I don't think he wants to take that loss, because I think he's actually, in the grand scheme of things, more interested in throwing a bone to his base. And even if this doesn't come to pass, which I have a feeling it's not going to come to pass, or it's going to be these targeted trade tariffs on specific items, and it's not going to be anything near as sweeping as he proposed, he will be able to say, well, I tried to fight the swamp and the swamp won. His supporters will believe anything he says anything anyway, because he's infallible. And ultimately, it may actually help tip the balance in that 18th congressional district, which he doesn't want to lose, because more than anything, the presidency is a vanity project, and he doesn't want to have a loss. I mean, it's just listening to that right there. I mean, it's just, again, it's like he's just so pathetic. I mean, like you said, I mean, this probably isn't going to happen. You know, or it'll be like really like Chinese made pots and pans. Something like that will, okay. Which will still, still though, if you're listening to this, go into your kitchen right now and see if you have any Chinese made pots and pans or something. I mean, it's still going to hit us, because again, all of the, most of the, say like big companies like Walmart, I mean, they're not none of the stuff they sell is made in America. It's all made in China. So either way, it's going to hurt us. Or like you said, this is really a tax. We're really taxing people, to, buy, when they go to the store and they buy aluminum cans or, stainless steel, cookware or something like that, silverware. I mean, there's all these things, or cars. Yeah. I mean, that's a big one. And you could be buying a pot or a pan that's proudly made in America, but it could be made with steel that's imported. And so, of course, yeah. So that'll go up in price. I mean, look, we can talk about the efficacy of trade policy. I think on some level, that horse left the barn. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I find frustrating about this, because I've written about trade policy, I've written about the Clintons and their trade policy, I've written critically about it. But I think we're now getting into what's called the Industrial Revolution 2.0. We're now heading into 3D printing and 4D printing, and there's a new burger flipping machine called Flippy that has debuted in Southern California, where we now have automated burger flipping. Okay, there is a new economy afoot, and instead of fighting these old wars that have already been lost, I think it would be better to try and figure out how to deal with the shock that's coming, which is, how are we going to deal with an automated, roboticized economy?
Absolutely. Well, JP Sottile of News Vandal, thank you so much for joining us here in the first hour. Of course, please check out newsvandal.com and the News Vandal Rundown. In the second hour, we will be joined by our good friend Chuck Ochelli, so please stay tuned.
Narcotics.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio. You're an American institution. American Freedom Radio.
Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Our stringent quality controls and absolute zero GMOs plus testing for heavy metals makes us unique in the storable foods market. Our line of fruits, vegetables, and meats are suitable for everyday use, and you won't have to worry about throwing away valuable groceries ever again. Take out the amount you need and reseal the package for use within the next 6 months. Simply Clean Foods' primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze-dried food in our daily cooking. Go to simplycleanfoods.net. That's www.simplycleanfoods.net today.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms. And American English is loaded with euphemisms because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it. I'll give you an example of that. When I was a little kid, if I got sick, they wanted me to go to the hospital and see the doctor. Now they want me to go to a health maintenance organization. Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that. The CIA doesn't kill anybody anymore. They neutralize people. The government doesn't lie. It engages in disinformation. Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists. Contra killers are called freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight? They never mention that part of it to us, do they? Never mention that part of it.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom, and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com. or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, rocket copy. 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us right now here in the second hour, in the first hour we were talking with our good friend JP Sottile of newsvandal.com, and of course the man behind the Newsvandal Rundown. And I know I say this quite a bit, but I highly encourage people to check out newsvandal.com, and at the very least, just sign up for the daily email blast. Newsvandal Rundown is an excellent resource. If you, I get a lot of people, ask me, oh, how do you, what do you do to like keep up on the news, and what do you follow, and blah. And there are, of course, there are always my go-to sites and things that, I think are worthwhile and important. But a lot of the time, it really is just checking out JP's daily emails, because there's so much in there. And again, as JP was saying, even if you don't click on any of the links, even if you're just sort of reading the headlines, I mean, they're very concise. They give you a great sort of window into what is happening around the world and here at home as well. I mean, they're always broken up into different sections. There's leads, which are just important articles that of the news of that particular day. There's also the politics and fleas, where JP dissects what's going on in Washington and places like that. There's a foreign entanglement section, which is great. Pandora's box cutter. The media scrum, where JP just sort of hammers on the media and the way it's handling things. And then there's a great little odds and ends section. Like today, JP had a whole thing about some of the new words that Merriam-Webster has now included in their latest edition of the dictionary, including ambiguous, which is a word that was invented by The Simpsons in the episode Lisa the Iconoclast, and it's in reference to Jebediah Springfield talking about something like the spirit of us embiggens us all. I don't know, Simpsons fans will, of course, be very familiar with embiggens and cromulent, which is another made-up word, which I was kind of hoping cromulent made it into Webster's, because I think that's a better made-up word. I mean, embiggen is great, but I also this is like such a weird aside, but, it's kind of strange that like something like, are people actually going to be using embiggen? And I don't know, sometimes when Merriam-Webster adds these words and stuff like that, they're just so strange to me that we're even doing that. I think there's room to be made, like with the Oxford Dictionary, where they introduce like slang words or sayings. That makes sense. But I don't really recall people using the word embiggen outside of, memes related to The Simpsons. So I don't really quite know what Merriam-Webster is doing with that. But there you go, embiggen. That's your word for today. We are having a little bit of trouble connecting our good friend Chuck Ochelli from the Ochelli Effect. So it might just be me rambling on here in this hour. I mean, hopefully if Chuck gets online, we will connect him. He was online a few minutes ago, but Danny and I were having a little trouble. I think there might be something with Chuck's internet at the moment. maybe it's just, anticipation of the second big winter storm that is supposed to hit sometime tonight and all day tomorrow. So, we'll have to wait and see if we get Chuck on. But there is some interesting news that we can kind of cover while hopefully Chuck reboots Skype and gets online. And this was something that just sort of I was just sort of glancing at, so I haven't really read this article, but maybe we'll check it out together right now. I saw this. This was on Sputnik News, and the headline is: U.S. troops in Niger ambush were acting without command authorization. This is according to various reports. And this one sort of caught my eye for a variety of reasons. I mean, the first one being that I was paying pretty close attention to this ambush that was in the Tongo region in Niger. So it's also known as the Tongo ambush. And this resulted in 4 U.S. soldiers and 5 Nigerian soldiers being killed. And people will remember this at the time because there was a lot of controversy over, what really happened. And then there was this whole thing, where Trump was rude to the widow of one of the soldiers. And it became like this sort of media, crap show, if I can say that, for quite some time. And there were lots of questions about what had actually happened. I mean, there were big questions about why Niger was even involved, why the U.S. was even involved in a place like Niger. And suddenly, lots of people were waking up to the realization that, there were U.S. special forces operating in Niger. And this has now been revealed, I believe it's according to Stars and Stripes, which spoke to anonymous U.S. military officials, that, there were some serious questions about command approval going on. And this is, I believe this is actually from Stars and Stripes, quote, "Since the October ambush, numerous contradictory reports have surfaced of the events leading up to it. Originally, the Pentagon claimed that a 12-strong U.S. Army Special Forces team was accompanying 30 Nigerian troops to meet with tribal leaders along the Mali-Niger border, only to have the parameters of their mission change midway through. In this version, they were reassigned en route to hunt for Dandua Chefo, an al-Qaeda-affiliated militant who operated along the border instead. Now, the officials have claimed that the team told their commanders they were meeting with tribal leaders, but instead altered the mission themselves and went after Chefu from the start." And I believe with that sound, we are joined by Chuck Ochelli.
Yeah, the pop of the lighter. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Wow. Good, because I really was just sort of running on nothing over there. Chuck, if you probably didn't hear us, but we were talking about this recent article I just saw that popped up in my news feed about remember the ambush in Niger. I think we talked about it ad nauseum when it happened on your show. But apparently they were acting without proper command or authorization. Have you seen this report?
Well, we knew at that time that there was some confusion as to what went down, right? Because it seemed as though people who should have been in the know in the Trump administration directly were not. We knew that this was somewhat of a covert operation because there was no sort of idea about it among other people that normally would have had this sort of knowledge. And we had some casualties that were reported, and these were the first casualties, if memory serves correctly, that were reported during the Trump administration. Now, I didn't see this article you're talking about, and by the way, sorry I wasn't listening to the show. I was dealing with rebooting the computer, which had decided to take a dive on me there. So here I am again, hoping that all sound is good and clear. As I begin to enter my comments on this. No, okay, so now that I'm up to speed. It does seem as though, if you remember when that story was first reported, there was a bit of seemingly legitimate shock on the faces of the individuals that would normally relate this information to us. And I thought maybe it was just my impression at the time, because of my very Trump negative sort of attitude, that maybe it was all me. But no, there was an oddity to this, and apparently there's more to the story, huh?
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems as if they were. I guess the story, from what I can gather, and again, I'm reading this right now for the first time, but that they were supposedly headed to meet with tribal leaders along the Mali-Niger border, but then sometime, I guess, in between them, traveling over there, they decided, or they were reassigned to hunt for an Al-Qaeda affiliated militant who operated along the border instead. And apparently this was done without proper command authorization. And the military parameters of special forces in Niger are such that they're not allowed to, conduct operations like that without, the proper authority. Like, it's not, I would assume, I'm not totally sure on this, so I might be completely wrong, but, if you're a unit in Afghanistan, for instance, I mean, you probably have some wiggle room to pursue various targets. Obviously, if you know of an Al-Qaeda target, I mean, you would probably, confirm that with the brass, but, you are allowed some wiggle room, as I said, to kind of go after these things, whereas in Niger, that is not the case. And it seems as if they did this either on their own or somebody within, AFRICOM told them to do this, and then they were all killed.
Well, it seems as though we'd have to have a meeting of minds of sorts between AFRICOM and JSOC here, because you would need Joint Special Operations Command to also sign off on something like this. And who is reporting this, by the way, Pierce? What is the source of this information that apparently they didn't have, proper authorization?
So I'm reading this from a Sputnik News article, but it also, I believe the initial report on this was Stars and Stripes. So I might try to pull that up while we're talking and see exactly what they say there. But it does state that I believe it's the head of AFRICOM, whose name so AFRICOM Commander General Thomas Waldhauser is set to testify before the House Armed Services Committee on Tuesday, so sometime today, or he's probably already testified. He is expected to recommend greater oversight to ensure missions in Africa are properly approved and not too risky. Which this also kind of begs the question whether missions like this haven't been going on quite a bit. I mean, we obviously heard about this one in Niger because all these soldiers were killed. But if there isn't the sort of proper command authorization going on, I mean, it makes you wonder who's in charge of these operations. Are are various special forces teams just kind of acting on their own? Is the command structure for the local AFRICOM commander letting people run their own mission? I mean, this sort of, there's a lot of questions here, and the fact that you have, General Thomas Waldhauser having to say, we should have a little bit more oversight about what we do in Africa, that is kind of worrying that oversight was not already in place.
Well, especially again, considering that we have generals in the position of civilian control at the Pentagon at this point, our Secretary of State, our security advisors. All these people are supposed to be well familiar with proper military chains of command, right? And this is pretty interesting. Now, it is also interesting to me that Sputnik would decide to put this out now, because look, let's face it, whether the original source is Stars and Stripes or not, I'd be interested to know. But the fact that they're pushing this right now, I wonder if that has anything to do with the conflict that's happening in Syria. Now, some people would say, well, why does one have to do with the other? I'll tell you why. Because a lot of these things in real time are not so clear-cut or black and white as many a news organization would like you to believe. And we know that over the past, decade or so, things have gotten a lot more messy because rules of engagement have been changed, mission statements and the type of mission creep that we're witnessing regarding, the continued occupation in Afghanistan. What is the actual mission? I mean, initially, what were we there to do versus what we're there to do today? The politicking of why it is, quite literally, in case I'm sure everybody who listens to your show knows this, but the idea that there are troops there that are literally defending poppy fields, which is part of the game when it comes to, keeping the warlords happy, whom we groomed and adopted as allies, I hold up air quotes for those of you at home, during this time, and the coalition government that emerged there, right, which had all sorts of problems with it. Initially, Hamid Karzai being the guy who was the head of it. Nobody's really talking about what's happening with the Afghan government right now. But anyway, back to Niger and why it is that Syria would be relevant. I think that across the planet, people that are actually in the know who are not buying from the state-run and corporate-run news agencies their information on a constant basis are starting to understand that, maybe there's a whole lot of agendas tied to this war on terror nonsense that the United States keeps saying, we need to make sure we keep the allies that we have in the war on terror, and also we need to procure more, which was the explanation for why it is we took on a precarious position with a place like Pakistan, again, dealing with Afghanistan. And it sounds like I'm just running all over the map, but the truth is that I see this as possibly a distraction, maybe a minor mea culpa over a minor operation, as a limited sort of hangout, because what's actually going on is a lot of unreported conflict. A point that I make all the time, and I know I've made it with you several times, and you're, relatively on the same page, is that there is a lot of live fire going on across the planet that the United States is involved in, where there are not headline casualties, there are not headlines going out across, the international news services or anything like that, but there's a lot of action on the globe. It's not a peaceful place at this time. And again, all tied to this allegedly singular, homogeneous idea that we need to fight them over there so that they don't come over here. And meanwhile, the only people who have attacked us on our own soil are our own people, one way or another. Okay. Because when was the last time? Oh, wait, that's right. There was that holiday attack with a truck in a crowd in New York. But hey, I bet that's disappeared down the memory hole as well. But we have not seen a significant attempt by any terrorist organization to strike us, even during a time when allegedly, we need to watch out for our refugees and everybody else who's coming here, because we don't know what's going on, according to the great leader. We need to stop everything because we got to figure out what's going on as far as immigration goes. So, I'm starting to see this as, let's find out what it is they're going to put out related to some very limited engagements, because it's time to cover up what's coming next. And I think that, again, people who have a handle on the actual military action that's really occurring, not the stuff that's being reported in public, are starting to understand that the United States, first of all, is spread way too thin, regardless of the size of the empire. And in addition, not only is it spread way too thin strategically, but there is no cohesive bond between these divergent agendas across various continents. The reality is that the war machine exists to be the war machine. There's various justifications, and you can pick and choose which one you like. But the bottom line is that the war on terror in general, being the greater justification for what's happening in Niger, what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in Syria, what's happening in a couple of other nation states which don't get even a single mention anywhere. And again, whether it's the alleged allies that we have in Pakistan, or it is what's happening in Yemen, or it is the dirty deals that are going on while the Saudis purge themselves just a little more and get restitution paid between the different royals over there. Forget about the actual Saudi population outside of the royal family. That's yet another story. But hey, you know what? I think it is. It's time for a deluge of various cover-ups and a couple of mea culpas, again, because of the very public fact that we actually had, some servicemen returned to us in slightly non-working order or dead. How about we'll just be blunt? You know what? It turns out that you can't quite keep that fully contained because you got to give them military funerals, and all their families don't remain quiet, even if the president does call and tell the wife that they know that they knew what they signed up for when they did it, right? Yeah. So, point is, it seems to me as though there is no proper control over the military. I think that there is a lack of coherence in the strategy, or what is the plural of strategy? I don't know if it is strategies exactly. Maybe it's the stratagerum or something like that. I just invented a word. Cool. But whatever it might be, the general strategy du jour, fitting the agenda du jour, I think it's meant to just keep you, sort of, we're informing you about the action across the globe. It's not that big a deal because we have a handle on it. But the truth is that this whole thing is about to really come undone, and they're going to blame it on their enemies as opposed to the mismanagement of the people that are in control of the military-industrial complex here in the American empire. I believe that's exactly what we're looking at here, once we answer all the questions. But as far as the ugliness and the lack of control, via AFRICOM, and what the Joint Special Operations Group had to say about it, the truth is that the public is not going to be privy to exactly what the command and control issues were there. We might get some public testimony from some individuals, but again, it's going to be a very limited hangout. So to me, it seems like if Stars and Stripes is reporting it, that's another thing. Don't forget, the military-controlled paper reporting on the military and then being re-reported by a hostile foreign government who has government-controlled news agencies for the most part, even though allegedly there's a couple independent ones I heard recently, Pierce. But, it is what it is. And, you got to take it with several grains of salt. Now, maybe I'm just, I don't know, jaded about the whole thing. What do you think?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think you're jaded at all. I mean, I'm just again, I pulled up some of the articles on that the Stars and Stripes had done on this one is actually from the Associated Press. That was
breaking the fourth wall. That's exactly what I tried to give Pierce time to do while I was running my mouth on that monologue. Okay, sorry. Back to the show, Pierce. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So this from the Associated Press that came out today, and this is the headline: Probe finds deadly Niger mission lack proper approval. And it's funny because they basically say that this military investigation concluded that the team didn't get required senior command approval for their risky mission to capture a high-level Islamic State militant. And then a little bit, further on down the article, it's, quote, the investigation finds no single point of failure leading to the attack, which occurred after the soldiers learned Cafu had left the area. This is the militant. Checked his last known location and started for home. It also draws no conclusion about whether villagers in Tongo, where the team stopped for water and supplies, alerted ISIS militants to American forces in the area. Still, questions remain about whether high-level commanders, if given the chance, would have approved or adjusted the mission or provided additional resources that could have helped repel the ambush. And then in another...
Wait. Two quick things here before you continue, Piers. First of all, I could have swore that earlier on in the story it was an Al-Qaeda operative. Now we're talking about IS, the ISIS crisis, ISIL, ISIS. All of a sudden, one morphs into the other, and I could have swore they were two different things. But then again, your experiences may vary out there. But I do recall that Al-Qaeda was a separate thing. All right. That's first problem. Second problem is, I don't know, again, maybe I'm rusty with the English language, but I'm hearing a lot of double talk here that tells me that despite the fact that we are finding that in our own investigation of ourselves that we have actually done nothing specifically wrong, although things could have went better, we can't point to a specific thing that actually went wrong regardless of the analysis and, of various, post-mortems that would be done on all of these sorts of scenarios and engagements in order to learn, because that's usually what the military does, is it studies its successes and failures to understand how to replicate and how to eliminate issues like this on a normal day anyway. This is the way the military operates. So, interesting to me that they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth right there, but please continue, Piers.
No, I was just going to kind of reiterate what you were saying there. I mean, there seems to be quite a lot of double talk, double think going on here, where they are clearly stating that this report, which has been that AFRICOM produced, which is now under Defense Secretary Mattis's control. I mean, he's going to review it, and then maybe we'll be lucky to get some snippets, if not the entire report from this. But it does seem as if they're not really coming out and saying who was really responsible. Now maybe we will find that out later. But it seems as if midway through their original mission, which was just to go speak with tribal elders, they were told to pursue this ISIS affiliated commander. And again, they keep kind of bouncing back. He worked for ISIS. He's ISIS affiliated. He's part of this brand new ISIS group that's been operating in and around Mali. And again, there was a big sort of skirmish about a week ago between members of the Tuareg community and Tuareg fighters, who people will, if they can remember back that far, when the whole sort of coup happened in Mali a few years ago under Obama, there was a big threat that the Tuareg fighters were going to try and liberate northern Mali, which is they're not, Tuareg are a whole different ethnic group. Timbuktu, for instance, is one of their traditional capitals. But anyway, these Tuareg fighters were fighting with this sort of brand new ISIS faction in Mali. There's been a sort of a rebirth of that, as well as Al-Qaeda again. There was what was it, today or yesterday? I can't remember now off the top of my head. There was Al-Qaeda's wing in Mali, which is the Group for Support of Islam and Muslims. They claim credit for a large-scale attack in Burkina Faso, which is another strategically important country in Central Africa because of minerals and, diamonds, gold, and I believe also uranium as well. So there's so many of these different groups working in and around this part in Africa. And again, we're not really being given a straight answer as to what actually happened. Who told these people to go pursue someone else? Why did they not get approval? What, and all AFRICOM is really going to suggest is that, there should be more senior level approval within AFRICOM for conducting missions deemed of higher risk. What does that really boil down to? And it's interesting too, from, General, Wallhauser's, testimony today. He's also recommending, or basically insinuating, that we're going to need to kind of up our presence in Africa because, of course, China is going to be building more and more military bases around China. And he mentions this naval base in Djibouti, which is very near to our main operational base within Africa, which is near Djibouti City at the airport there. And he's sort of talking about China becoming a bigger presence in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which of course the U.S. has long controlled and dominated, mostly with the help of the CIA. So it's interesting, again, along with this huge screw up in Niger, at least in terms of, men dying there. We're having to explain what's going on. Suddenly, we don't really have a sense of who's in control of these missions and who's, where's the oversight with this. But also, better watch out, because China, they're going to be building more bases, so we need to be more involved in Africa. And, you can already kind of begin reading the tea leaves where you see a situation where, Chinese and American troops operating in the same region, some Al-Qaeda faction comes in. That's got international incident written all over it. Right. And just one little other bit, and then I'll throw it to you, Chuck, but just to remind people, too, geographically, the Tongo region is very near to the capital of Niger, Niamey. But that border that it shares with Mali over there, it's a main trafficking route for guns and cocaine from South America. So again, just another layer to all of this. You've got these U.S. Special Forces operating with seemingly very little command oversight, and you've also got cocaine and gun traffickers. Not to mention also, there's, human trafficking that goes on there. There's all sorts of, diamonds, uranium. There's lots of shady stuff that happens in and around that area. But that's just yet another layer to all of this. And it's just I guess here's my thing for you, Chuck. Where does Donald Trump fall in? He's not really responsible for any of this, right?
Well, I hate to say this, but no, not really. Look, as early as 2015, I can very much recall trying to sound the alarm among people that, we were looking at something that was going to build up on the African continent over the next few years. And nobody takes me seriously, and especially nowadays because of the way the news cycle is when it comes to discussing these things. And I've always said that I feel as though the roots of what will eventually be called World War III will begin on the African continent this time. And the reason is that the Chinese have effectively gone in and done a very sort of soft colonial landing on the continent rather successfully, rather proficiently. They have gone in and made deals for a lot of these resources. Now that we know that, as we discussed recently, the U.S. dollar not exactly performing as it should be on the global moneyscape, if you will, the Chinese are in a very good position. They now have a lot of the natural resources, a lot of the access. They've actually placed a lot of their citizens physically on the ground in a lot of areas where, it used to be that if you just had U.S. military bases nearby, that was good enough to cover a piece of ground. So it is the corporate invasion, seemingly, of China versus the old school military-industrial complex, American empire, and here we go. We're going to use one of these surrogate battlefields, very much like Southeast Asia was in the 1960s, 70s, and very much like, Central and South America became in the 80s and 70s, 80s, 90s, really, 90s rather quietly after Iran-Contra, but still all the way up until we needed to find a new place to play, which was the Middle East, post 9/11 reality. So it seems as though the focus might actually shift fully to the African continent, and I don't think that people recognize exactly how dangerous this is. There are a lot of shifting factions within various political groups that I can't even begin to expound upon here because it would take us a whole show to explain. the various nation states and the various problems that are there. Now, that's not to say that there are not quite profoundly developed industrial, technological areas of the continent. You know, it's not all. Some people listen to this kind of talk and figure, you know, it's a bunch of people in jungles with sticks. No, there are plenty of areas like that. Yes, indeed, but that's not the majority of what's happening, and especially with this, again, this soft colonization that the Chinese have brought in, you know, this did not just simply exploit the natural resources. I mean, certainly it's not distributing wealth to a great, a huge, significant number of the, you know, general population. But as far as the individuals in power and the people that are there making these corporate deals, they are being enriched quite well. Now, this stands in stark contrast to, again, the U.S. empire formula, which is usually, you know, listen, we'll show you what we'll do to your neighbors, and then you might want to make a deal with us. And in fact, it's a better deal for you if we have a military base there, or we can lay out some more assets, which is why we're in, 160-something countries right now with some sort of presence. And again, a lot more action, a lot more actions occurring on the globe that are being recorded and reported, apparently. So when we try and put this in context with what happened in Niger, here's the thing. I am almost willing to bet anything that there's a lot more covert actions that we're not hearing about. And all of this stuff, this ball was rolling long before 2016. Okay, if I was able to take note of it and be able to map it out in 2015 with no resources or anything else, you think that the Pentagon didn't know about this? Oh, I don't know, as easily as 2005 and 6, when we started to see the war on terror narrative sort of deflating. They've always got to look for the next conflict, and it seems to me as though, yeah, Africa's going to be it, and I think it's just going to suddenly emerge with some sort of justification. Now, I'm not out here to say that here comes the next false flag event and all that other nonsense, which I'm hearing out of some people in the alternative media now about these predictive false flag events that are about to occur that are going to draw the U.S. into other international conflicts. But let us not forget that the formula is something that is still viable and useful, and you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So it makes me wonder what the next alleged terrorist attack is going to be on, I don't know, something like some U.S. embassies or something like that. Wait a minute, that sounds familiar. In order to justify the fact that we have some wanted factions that are there, some of the preliminary groundwork is laid out with the discussions of things like Al-Shabaab and, what is that other one? That
Boko Haram.
Boko Haram. Right. I was going to say it reminds me of a 1970s band, but that was anyway. There's a band out there that has a similar name. I don't want to get into it, but the point is that Procol Harum or whatever it was called. It just always reminds me of this Boko Haram. I can't help it. But when you take a look at these things, it just seems to me as though we're setting up for the next great boogeyman, which is going to be, hey, look, we beat ISIL, ISIS, whatever it is we're going to call the construct. We've beaten them in the Middle East. All things are well, even though there's still plenty of people dying over there as a result of, still to this day, the wanton and absolutely criminal destruction of a bystander nation called Iraq. That is still, biting us back as we speak. But that and the support of the warlords and the the drug syndicate that has its roots there in Afghanistan, well, that's still going on. But our next big conflict, where we're supposed to be fighting them over there so they don't get to over here, might just happen to get into a little bit of an African feel next. It's got to be revived because, even Trump supporters don't really feel like the terrorist threat is that big. yeah, Muslims are a big deal, and yeah, we got to get rid of all them. And gee, you know, now that Trump's in, we can do that. But it's a whole different ball game. And the reality is that unfortunately, a lot of civilian populations are going to pay very heavily for this brinksmanship between the Chinese and the American empire. And meanwhile, we're still struggling with Russia over the Syrian thing. We're still actually engaged. And again, if you consider the expansive area that we're trying to cover here under the guise of this war on terror, it almost makes you wonder what would happen, Pierce, if there was a legitimate war that somebody decided to actually start based on God knows what, for God knows what reason, some nation deciding to literally engage with the U.S., it might not be a bad time to do so, because I don't believe our military, although now this almost sounds like I'm on Trump's team here, because he wants to expand the military too, doesn't he? And I'm not talking about expanse, I'm talking about smart usage. Appears to me as though we got people spread out all over the place trying to conduct various operations to justify various agendas that all really boil down to the exploitation of various natural resources and hey, as a bonus, the constant reassertion of supremacy as the world's only superpower, right? You know, and all of this it just makes my head spin anymore. But Niger to me is one of these things where it's going to be a little limited hangout, because we've already gotten part of the news on that. We've already dealt with a couple of dead servicemen and exactly what went wrong publicly and so on and so forth. So it won't be a shocker. But if they start telling us that, these types of actions have actually occurred in 15, 20 different nations recently, and the casualties, some of them being kept quiet. I've heard rumors of this, but cannot confirm it, that there's been more casualties. Because people work under the guise of military intelligence, their families know better, and they'll collect their benefits so long as they keep their mouths shut. And unfortunately, Johnny's not coming home. But this is again something that you're not going to get from anywhere else. And what can I say, man? What can I say? But you know what? Anybody who wants to blame this on Trump, you can't. But if you want to recognize that Mr. Why are we involved in all these different places across the planet is doing absolutely nothing to change that situation, if you want to tell me that these people lied to us about getting us involved in various military engagements and all that kind of stuff, is doing nothing to change that. And indeed, we have a military here now pointing fingers at each other, despite the fact that we have a commander-in-chief who has made plenty of public statements explaining that, I'm going to let the generals figure out how to run the military. Which scared the crap out of me and still makes me rather nervous, because, sorry, folks, that's not the way our, government is supposed to run or our military. And the military and the government are not necessarily the same thing at all times, but that's a story for another day. This is concerning. This is disconcerting. This is disturbing. This is a lot of things. But to say that it's something new, or to say that it's anything outside of business as usual, except maybe, some people are beginning to consider it in a slightly different light, unless you're, a right-winger or a right-wing apologist, in which case you're saying, no, this is the way things are supposed to go, and thank God it's going this way, because unlike the way Obama was handled, he wasn't doing any of this. No, he did it too, and despite the fact that, everybody wanted to scream that he was some sort of a secret Muslim. I always love that phrase, by the way, the secret Muslim that Obama was. Seems to me as though he was just as engaged with the alleged other Muslims, and he was just as engaged in many other places, although I can say this, I didn't have evidence so much of African involvement. And some people claim that he really didn't want to have, AFRICOM being all that active when he was in office. Perhaps that has actually changed. But I guess we'll have to wait and see, because most of this stuff will remain classified for many, many years. Okay, Pierce, I'm sorry. I know I ranted there a bit, but you did say you didn't have much to go on for a bit, so I figured I will just run my mouth about my general thoughts regarding all this. And again, I haven't even studied the precise article you're talking about, and like I said, I just restarted the computer before I joined you late, which again I apologize for. But everything that I'm seeing, it's leading to exactly this, that there are preparations being made for much greater conflict, and it's going to come right on time, because a lot of these interesting political figures like to utilize warfare in order to rally a nation behind them when things begin to fracture under their feet. And didn't work so well for Nixon, but did work well for a lot of other political figures who could show us some sort of shallow military victory, or give us something else to look at so that we wouldn't pay attention to the terrible job they were doing, like George H.W. Bush giving us the Desert Storm victory, despite the fact that he was destroying the economy with his idiotic policies and had participated in it, for the 8 years previous when he was, puppeting the Reagan administration. Oh, did I say that out loud? I think I did. All of that going on, and the various other presidents that have absolutely utilized, the people that we're supposed to honor all the time, our troops, utilize them and put them in harm's way just to make sure that the peasants, that would be you and me, by the way, that the peasants don't turn against them and realize that the emperor is actually wearing no clothes, although there is an American empire, and thankfully the idiots that we usually see in public are only the middle managers and not really the controllers, because otherwise we'd all be dead by now. Okay, Pierce, I'm done.
A lot I kind of wanted to add on to there while you were talking. One quick correction: the attack in Burkina Faso was actually last Friday. I was not paying attention when I was reading the updates on that, so it actually happened last Friday. But all the same, you're talking there, Chuck, about this sort of like ramping up, that they're preparing for some, this new threat or something. And I do find it particularly interesting that, again, Trump defeated ISIS, yet they seem to be just running wild in places like Mali. And now Niger. Now also, again, Al-Qaeda, that group that we defeated or disappeared or something, and yet we have Al-Qaeda, carrying out a brutal bombing in the capital of Burkina Faso. And even Ayman al-Zawahiri, remember him? Apparently he's still alive, and he also recently, a few days after the attack in Burkina Faso, he offered his own comments on this and how wonderful this was. So we're seeing this odd rebirth of Al-Qaeda. We're seeing ISIS, which was defeated, but now it seems to be operating all over Central and West Africa. Certainly the Niger ambush should be, that was ISIS as far as we know. And, there we go. ISIS is able to actually kill U.S. soldiers if they want to. And, it also just strikes me, you mentioned, maybe a United States embassy in Africa will be bombed. Of course, the 1998 U.S. embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. I mean, that's sort of what put Al-Qaeda on the map. That is, one of the moments that sort of made Al-Qaeda into this real threat, beyond, WTC 93, which is not, you can kind of make a case that wasn't really quite Al-Qaeda, or Al-Qaeda was not really formed as such, at that time or just after. But certainly the 1998 embassy bombings, attacking the USS Cole, those were these sort of catalyzing events. And, Al-Qaeda's roots in many ways have always been in Africa. Not only the embassy bombings, but of course, whatever Osama was doing in Sudan all those years, while he had, shady characters like Ali Mohammed, who is, this is the same guy who worked for the Pentagon, the CIA, and Al-Qaeda at the same time, who was training bin Laden's bodyguards in Sudan, outside of Khartoum. I mean, what's going on there? The same thing in places like Mali, which has seen a rise in all these things. And it's funny, too, we have the head of AFRICOM, General Waldhauser, talking about the threat of China, or at least saying that China's going to be building more bases in Africa. And you can see that through, as you were putting it, China's sort of soft colonialization, their economic interests, building infrastructure, factories, things like that within within Africa. That is, of course, eventually going to lead to some sort of a confrontation with many of these jihadi groups, many of which have shadowy links back to the U.S. intelligence apparatus. And then that kind of makes you wonder, too, China's soft colonialization is going to become a much more harder colonialization as they do probably begin. They've been quietly building, military bases or outposts. They've been developing relationships with various African security services. No doubt there's this naval base now in Djibouti. Just logically, you're going to need some sort of security if, say, potentially, there was some sort of resentment from the local population one way or another, because, again, these facilities are being, manned in a lot of cases by Chinese nationals who are implanted there. Like I said, a soft colonization. So, logically speaking, you might want some contingency forces there to be able to deal with if there's any problems. Protect your assets, right? Oh, yeah, entirely. And I think that's what's happening. And again, if the U.S. and other countries have secret military bases in Africa, obviously the Chinese do as well. But it's another interesting kind of point, and just sort of shifting, or moving the globe around a little bit. Where is ISIS also making a serious comeback, or a part where, Trump hasn't defeated ISIS, northern Afghanistan, where that's where they're the most powerful. They've been battling the Taliban. They've been able to take over small military outposts, including, taking over control of small cities and stuff like that in northern Afghanistan. They've enticed a lot of Taliban fighters and other jihadi groups to come fight for them because, of course, ISIS always pays more. And then, where the hell are they getting cash to fund these guys? And that has become such an issue that China is now in very serious talks to build a military base in Badakhshan province in Afghanistan, which is in the Wakhan corridor, which if you pull up a map of Afghanistan, the Wakhan corridor is this little tiny sliver that separates Tajikistan and I can't remember the other. Oh, it might be. No, I can't remember. Anyway, you'll see it's this little tiny sliver, and it shares a very small border with China, of course, with China's Xinjiang region, where they've been fighting with the Uyghurs there, both in a real sense that there are many Uyghurs that want their own autonomy, and then also groups like the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, which is a Al-Qaeda affiliated jihadi group closely associated with the CIA and the State Department. And China, there's a real fear that, ISIS or Uyghur-affiliated militants will use the Wakhan corridor to enter into China and then back into Afghanistan. More and more ISIS fighters, particularly of Uyghur and Central Asian descent, are fleeing from Syria and going to places like Afghanistan, where it is not inconceivable that they would go and bring the fight to China. Which is certainly no friend of these jihadi groups. So, again, we've got China now building military bases and naval facilities in East Africa. and presumably in West Africa and sort of northern Central Africa, and now they're going, they're in talks with Kabul about building a base in Afghanistan, which would be a big step again. I mean, China does not operate foreign military bases, so and there have been reports and rumors of Chinese troops patrolling with Afghan forces in the Wakhan corridor. So, and it strikes me as yet another funny, China's building another base near a place that, is a U.S. colony that is battling a violent insurgency with bizarre ties to the United States. I mean, there seems to be a pattern here, doesn't there, Chuck?
Well, there does, but when I look at these patterns in a lot of cases, Pierce, I got to be honest with you, I often find myself looking for what's missing. And I have a question for you because perhaps I've overlooked it, but have you seen any significant reports of any of these jihadi type, confrontations with the Chinese anywhere? Because I gotta be honest with you,
Uyghur
not
groups.
much.
No, and there is I think a legitimate belief that China exploits this, and here we are. We're at the break, Chuck. Imagine that. I didn't have a show, and now we're running out of time. Chuck Ochelli from the Ochelli Effect, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for listening. And I will be coming to you next week with the great Stephen Singular, talking all about his new novel, In the Cards. So please stay tuned, and until then, I'll be talking to you very soon.
No rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio.
Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Our stringent quality controls and absolute zero GMOs plus testing for heavy metals makes us unique in the storable foods market. Our line of fruits, vegetables, and meats are suitable for everyday use, and you won't have to worry about throwing away valuable groceries ever again. Take out the amount you need and reseal the package for use within the next 6 months. Simply Clean Foods' primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze-dried food in our daily cooking. Go to simplycleanfoods.net. That's www.simplycleanfoods.net today.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
Assassination. You know what's interesting about assassination? Well, not only does it change those popularity polls in a big hurry, but it's also interesting to notice who it is we assassinate. Do you ever notice who it is? Stop to think of who it is we kill. It's always people who've told us to live together in harmony and try to love one another. Jesus, Gandhi, Lincoln, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John Lennon. They all said, try to live together peacefully. Bam! Right in the head. Apparently we're not ready for that. Yeah, that's difficult behavior for us. We're too busy sitting around trying to think up ways to kill each other. Here's one we came up with. It's efficient, too. Genocide, you know? Killing large numbers of people simply because they don't look like you, they don't talk like you, and they don't have the same kind of hats you do. You ever notice that anytime you see two groups of people who really hate each other, chances are good they're wearing different kind of hats. Keep an eye on that. It might be important.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio and service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control outbound. Control is good. 5. Roger copy. 3. 2. 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.